Hey, fellow superhero cinephiles. Did you know that almost 30% of adults say they haven't read a book in the past year? The primary reason why is a lack of time. Well, Audible's here to help with the gift of found time. Thanks to Audible, you can listen to audiobooks like Marvel Comics, The Untold Story, or Slugfest, inside the epic 50-year battle between Marvel and DC. Read up on the history of superheroes in comics and movies with Grant Morrison's Super Gods. You can also check out Vanguard, my original superhero novel series, or try The Vril Agenda or The Adventures of Fortune McCall, both of which were written by our dearly departed host emeritus, Derrick Ferguson. Whatever you're looking for, Audible has thousands of titles that you can consume while commuting, exercising, cooking, or just relaxing at home. And not only audiobooks, an Audible membership also gives you access to tons of content like podcasts, theatrical performances, and exclusive Audible originals that you won't find anywhere else. To give you a taste of what you can get, Audible has partnered with this show to provide listeners with a free 30-day trial. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/supercinemapod, and with your free trial, you get 1 free audiobook and 2 free Audible originals. In fact, you get to keep those titles even if you cancel before the trial is over. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to audibletrial.com/supercinemapod and start your free trial today.
Au contraire, my little fish stick. He knows exactly what it's like to lose someone he loves. You know, like a father. Like a mother.
Be very careful with the next thing you say.
Like an adopted son. Isn't that right, Batman? Maybe, in a way, that smelly old flounder is right. Because how many can die in your arms before you grow numb to death?
That's not very careful.
Now, how many dead eyes can you look into before you die inside yourself?
I've been dead inside a long time. But even I have a limit. And if you cross that line, I swear to God,
Before what, Bruce? Kill me? You don't want to kill me. I'm your best friend. Besides, who's gonna give you a reach around? Anyway, you need me. You need me to help you undo this world you created by letting her die. Poor Lois. How she suffered so. I often wonder, how many alternate timelines do you destroy the world? Because, frankly, you don't have the cojones to die yourself. So as usual, I'll be the bigger man. A truce, Bruce. As long as you have this card, the truce. But all you have to do is tear it in half, and I'm happy to discuss with you in any way like why you sent a boy wonder to do a man's job.
you know, it's funny. You would talk about people who died in my arms. Because when I held Harley Quinn, and she was bleeding and dying, she begged me with her last breath. And when I killed you, and make no mistake, I will fucking kill you. Then I do it slow. I'm gonna honor that promise.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles. This is the first episode of kind of the new format of the show since Derrick's unfortunate passing. To begin with, at least for the time being, we're going to have kind of like a rotating guest system. We're going to have different people coming on to talk about different superhero movies, and because and we'll see what happens in the long run as far as like bringing on maybe someone permanently. But at the time, I think it'll be good to just have like, a few different voices on here, because Derrick's pretty much irreplaceable to begin with. So bringing on someone right off the bat would be kind of a tall order, I think. But I'm Perry Constantine. I'm your sole co-host, and since the next movie Derrick and I were supposed to cover was going to be Zack Snyder's Justice League, I was trying to think, well, I want to have someone on to talk about the Snyder Cut, and who else could I talk to besides Derrick, who kind of has like a lot to say about it. And there's only one guy I could think of, and that's Adam Lance Garcia. Adam, how you doing today?
I am doing very, very well, and I am so honored to be here. Just thank you so much for thinking about me. And I know that I can't replace Derrick's commentary in any shape or form, but I'm happy to honor him in any way I can today.
Oh, I'm sure he would have definitely loved to know that you're the first guy coming on after him. So I think you're definitely the right pick for this. But
you make me cry, but thank you.
There's been a lot of that going on since all this happened. But anyway, before we jump into the movie and jump into like news and all that, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am by day, I'm a producer for Condé Nast. I do celebrity and sort of talent and expert interviews. It's a weird job. I will classify as a dumb job because I get to talk about the things I love for a living. I've done, like, for example, Star Wars videos, Doctor Who videos, Warhammer videos. I just produced a Quantum Leap video. Oh, it's nice. A dumb job. I really do not know how I've had this, especially during the pandemic. And by night, I'm an author, such as yourself. I write, I'm best known for the Green Llama Legacy series, beginning with Green Llama Unbound, and I'm currently working on Green Llama Redemption, which is the third in the trilogy. I've been working on that for way too long, as well as a continuation in the form of an audio drama. Which will be hopefully coming out later this year.
Awesome.
That is, yeah. So that's a little bit about me. Also, I have 2 cats, and I live with my girlfriend, and that's all you really need to know about.
Okay, so before we jump into the Snyder Cut, one of the things we talk about a little bit on this show is just kind of update people on any superhero movie or TV related news and whatnot. And since you're a news guy and begin with, or in that realm-ish.
You're a news guy.
I just got an image of you like wearing a fedora and banging around at a typewriter.
I if you had told me, I do have a fedora. I have to. They're in the other room.
I think the incels have kind of ruined the fedora though for everybody.
Yeah, they really have. Yeah. I got it because I was like, I look cool and I feel like Indiana Jones. And now they're like incels. I'm like,
yeah. So anyway, do you know of any big superhero or movie or TV related news that's popped up in the past week or so, or anything that kind of caught your eye?
I'm really the biggest things that were kind of popping my eye, like were all the Marvel announcements. The date and dates. I'm not sure if you've already spoken about that.
No, we haven't had an episode since March. So
like that's the biggest thing. It's weird because like I'm really curious to see where they're going. I think it's my relationship with the MCU went from being very much a lover without question to being something of an atheist to now being an agnostic, I guess. It's something that like I appreciate for what it is. I enjoy it for like when it's great, it's great. Like I can talk to you, like you want to talk about the Guardians of the Galaxy films and like why they're just amazing, or the majority of the Captain America films, or like and a lot of things that they do that I'm like, this is great. This is like And then there's some stuff I'm like, okay, all right, you're doing that thing. But I am really curious to see what this next phase is going to be like, this post Endgame era, because I think it's yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on it, and I think the things that I'm most excited about, What If, because my friend, I have a friend who worked on that, and I know some of the stuff that she did on that, and nice. I was going to pitch some ideas, and she told me what she was doing, and I'm like, you don't need me.
Yeah,
damn, What If is one of the stuff she came up with. She was telling me about like.
So I was just saying, What If is one of those things I'm really looking forward to. I love that comic book. Like that was such a fun offbeat comic back in the day. Go ahead.
You're gonna dig it. Like I like that's like one of the, because it's one of those things where, I mean, obviously we know about like Peggy Carter being Captain Britain, and we have some of the things that we've seen in the previews. There's other stories. You're like, I remember her telling me about the because we've seen, again, this is in the trailers, the reveal that T'Challa is Star-Lord.
Yeah,
she told me like the pitch of it, and I was like, that's amazing. So there's a lot of that that's coming out that I'm really excited about. And I'm really curious to see what they're gonna do with Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
I think I'm glad they're doing Marvels. I think that's really exciting. There's a few other ones that obviously I'm really excited for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with the Eternals, because I think that's going to be a really interesting take. I'm hoping that, I guess my biggest thing is that I really want to see the MCU get weird. I really feel like I want them to get more and more outside their comfort zone. And we get teases of that in WandaVision, and teases of that in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But I really want to see, like, I just want them to go bonkers. I want them to not play it safe. I want them to like take us for a ride.
I think that's what we're going to get, especially when we get into Multiverse of Madness. Like that's one I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, especially because it's Sam Raimi coming back. That could be really interesting. Yeah, and also I'm kind of curious to see what Spider-Man. What was it? Not Far From Home.
No Way Home.
No Way Home. Yeah. I'm curious to see what that's going to be like. I really like Tom Holland's Spider-Man.
Yeah, same here.
I think he is, like, his story is one of my favorites in the MCU. I just, partially because I've always really appreciated a teenage Spider-Man, because that's Spider-Man that, like, I really associate, like, that's the Spider-Man that I wanted to be when I was a kid.
Right.
So I'm liking what they're doing. The one thing I worry about with Spider-Man is that, like, I like the first one was about, dealing with, like, Iron Man being this sort of father figure. Interesting. I dug that, like, there was, like, what's the world like after Tony Stark. Dug that. I'm kind of hoping that whatever No Way Home is, not getting into any rumors or anything, but, like, I really want it to be a Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that I really I want to see, especially because, like, I've just been playing nonstop Spider-Man on my PS5 and Spider-Man Miles Morales. I'm like, this is just more of this. Yeah,
those are amazing. Yeah, I played those on. I don't have a PS5 yet, but I definitely played both those on PS4, and I blew through Miles Morales in like a week. I think, like, it was just nonstop playing that. That was so much fun.
So much fun. So, like, I want more of that, and I think it's like I really want. I'm really curious to see what the MCU is going to do next.
I think for me, the biggest, I'm really interested in Shang-Chi. Like, I love that character. I love the Monk and Galassi stuff from back in the day. And I love, like, the whole kung fu aspect too. Like, Enter the Dragon is, like, one of my favorite movies. And I, after Simu Liu was cast, I'd started watching, like, right around the time he was cast, Netflix put Kim's Convenience on their network, and I started watching it. And I watched the first few episodes. I'm like, oh, this is okay, not bad. And then I just kind of, like, got distracted by other stuff, and I had stopped watching it. And then recently I was looking for something to watch on Netflix and stumbled on that. I'm like, oh, let me keep watching this. And, like, for the past, like, few weeks, I just blew through all 4 seasons that are on Netflix. And
nice.
it's so fun.
I've heard it's really good. Yeah, and Shang-Chi's really, I think it's gonna be interesting because I know you and I disagree on Iron Man 3.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I think it's gonna be very interesting how that film is going to feel in context now that we have Shang-Chi actually dealing with the Manchurian and dealing with the Ten Rings. And I think that's actually, like, to a larger point, what I will always give the MCU credit for
Mhm.
is it's not as planned as everyone thinks it is.
Mhm.
Everyone, and I think they say like, hey, this is phase 4 and this is what we're doing. It is very much made up on the fly. Like,
Mhm.
I remember asking someone, if you look in WandaVision, why there's like one shot where you can see the shadow of Vision's cape go out of sync.
Oh, really?
And it's
Okay.
because, yeah, like, it's interesting. And I was like, and I asked a friend of mine who works at ILM, like, why would they CGI the cape, let alone the shadow? It's like, because MCU, the Marvel changes their mind all the time.
Mhm.
I've heard that, like, they'll get copies of the script that are like completely different versions of the
Mhm.
story. So they're out, like, day to day, like movie to movie, it seems like it's all planned
Mhm.
because they're really, really good at figuring out how to make everything fit together,
Yeah, yeah.
even if it's after the fact. So, like, with Shang-Chi, it's going to be interesting that it's going to, like, they took this thing that, some people liked, some people didn't, and they're like, all right, what if we address it this way? What if
Mhm.
we, like, put all that into different contexts? Like how, Age of Ultron isn't anyone's favorite Avengers film, but they're using a lot of those elements in interesting ways. You're seeing Wanda's story and Vision's
Mhm.
story paying off in interesting ways. It's all from Age of Ultron. How like the Sokovia Accords, like with
Mhm.
like there's all these different things that are born out of Age of Ultron that work work well within the context of a larger franchise, and that's something that I'm really curious to see moving forward. And it's something I think that the MCU, like I said, does very, very well. If there's ever a chance to, like, change the conversation on the
Mhm.
MCU, it's always like, no, they don't plan it. They don't plan it. They're really good on thinking on their feet and finding it and
Mhm.
edit. And
The
I
way
think
I think
yeah. Go
sorry,
ahead.
just like the way I thought, the way it always kind of seemed to me was like they kind of have like a very rough idea of
Yeah.
kind of like where they want to go, and it's just like it's kind of like I always use this analogy when I'm talking about story planning and everything, and I say it's like using Google Maps, right? Use Google Maps; it gives you a route.
Yeah.
But if you turn off on the other path, it'll just reroute you back over there, and that's kind of
Right.
like that's one of the ways I approach writing. Like I know where I'm starting, I know where I need to go,
Yep.
and just like how I get there, it's the details aren't as clear. Like, maybe I'll want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
take a detour over here. Maybe there'll be some construction or traffic over here. And I kind of get the sense that Marvel operates in much the same way.
It's similar. Like, the biggest difference is because I'm very much the same way. Like, I'll
Mm.
plan out, like, a good example is like my and we were talking about this before we started recording, like my Green Llama story.
Mhm.
It is ending very much where I thought it was going to end. It
Mhm.
is, the story I'm telling is very much a story I planned long, long ago. The big difference is it's not happening the way I planned it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's that sort of, like, to your point, like, I dragged the map over the thing over, and I'm still getting there. The thing that I wanted to happen is still happening, because it's happening differently.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
Marvel, it's more that they'll shoot multiple options and
Oh,
multiple
okay.
different things, and or shoot different scenes, and they'll sort of put it together to make it work in
Mhm.
post.
Mhm.
It's not abnormal,
Mhm.
a thing for films. I mean, like, JJ Abrams does that a lot
Mhm.
in his own work. But I think that the biggest thing that they have to their benefits, they have Feige, who can,
Yeah.
like, oh, put this together. They can sort of mishmash and put various different takes together, various different scenes together to make it work because of the way they shoot. So
Mhm.
it is almost like I'm trying to think of using your Google Maps analogy and sort of broadening it. Imagine it's sort of like, what they do is they have like 5 cars, and
Mhm.
they're all like, all right, we all need to go down to, like, this is point A, this is point B. All right, car A, you go this way, car B, you go this way, the C, D. And then they're like, okay, we have all these maps. What if we take I was gonna say, like, with what, like, the only two shows that the Disney Plus series Winter Soldier, like, that was completely reshaped. And I think that's actually like to what I'm curious, and I was talking about this with someone else online, but I think Marvel is really good at going movie to movie, figuring it out as they go. Because like in isolation, this one movie, everything works, and then you have like you have this 2 hour brick of this wall, and then you have this other 2 hour brick of the wall, and the wall builds up really easily. But figuring it out as they go and sort of piecing it together, it seams are, you can see the seams a bit more in a season of TV than you could movie to movie.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah.
Sense. So yeah. Like I really want more. It means to be Captain America. What does Captain America's role in the world mean? All the stuff, like the sort of, while it was sort of nice scene to scene, like their journeys across the world and stuff like that, it every time it got away from like, let's talk about race and what having a black man as Captain America means. Like every time they got away from that, I was like, this is not as exciting and or as interesting as it could be. Like there's a lot of really, really, really powerful things you could say about having Sam Wilson be Captain America. And like, again, what does it mean to be a black man taking on the role of Captain America? So I think that in brief, I think they tried too many things at once.
Yeah.
I think they could focus on one thing.
They could have, I think this is what normally I'm okay with, like shortened seasons, because sometimes like some of those the Netflix Marvel shows like had a lot of padding in them, as entertaining as they were. But like they had this very soft, squishy middle where it's like a lot of navel gazing going on in those middle episodes. But and so like WandaVision was very tight, and then I also Watchmen I think is like the perfect example. Like that was so tight. And so like and in Falcon Winter Soldier, they said, oh, it's only going to be 6 episodes. I'm like, okay, good. It'll be really, really tight. And it's just like, you know what? I think they maybe could have used like an extra, like 2 episodes or so.
Yeah, that or like, it's like they could have used an extra 2 episodes, or they could have like saved the storyline for season 2. Like, I understand why Baron Zemo was there, but also I don't think we needed Baron Zemo in there. Like, I understand why. Like, I like the idea of the villains. I can't remember, the Globe Breakers,
the Flag Smashers.
Flag Smashers. Like I like that story, but it was like maybe you save that for next season, or you know, I felt like they were just trying to do too much. And to your point, like I've said this like a dozen times this week, like Watchmen is probably like one of the tightest, most relevant superhero TV shows I've seen in a long time. And like, God, they said so goddamn much with that series.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same. Like I loved as much as I love like all the Lethal Weapon style stuff, like the buddy comedy type stuff. I loved all that stuff. I love seeing Zemo was just great. Even though to your point, there wasn't really a whole lot of reason for him to be there, but he was just so fun to watch that I didn't really mind. And it wasn't until after the show was over that I was thinking about, I'm like, you know what? They didn't really use Zemo a whole lot.
Yeah, it was fun in the moment. And I think that's actually like an issue that I've had with both WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier is that I don't think this could decide who their villain was. You know, I think with Falcon and Winter Soldier, was the villain the Flag Smashers or was it Zemo? And because they it didn't feel like they could really decide which, or was it Walker? Like, who was the villain? Like,
right.
It caused it to be all smooshy. And the similar thing where like I love the Agatha all along reveal in the moment in WandaVision, but I still think there's a much more powerful, much tighter story where it's just Wanda and the antagonist is Monica, and Monica is these two women going through grief in different ways. Like, is it like, you have Wanda's grieving, Monica's grieving, Monica's dealing it with an unhealthy way, and Wanda is dealing with an unhealthy way, and that's the confrontation, because the enemy is grief. But instead they wanted Agatha for the fight, and it's like it muddied their narrative, it muddied the themes that they were trying to say, and so that was one of my issues with the Marvel shows right now. I am very excited for Loki.
Yeah, same
here, because it looks weird.
Well, just like to your point, like when you said you're hoping they're going to get weird, it looks like, I think Loki, they're really going to start getting weird with Loki.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're. I mean, do you think it's going to tie into Multiverse of Madness?
I don't know, because everybody thought that WandaVision was going to tie into Multiverse of Madness in a big way. Like there's the whole rumor that Benedict Cumberbatch was going to appear in it and all that kind of stuff, and of course the whole Quicksilver, which I love that I just love that they did take that whole Quicksilver thing as a giant troll and they turned it into a boner joke.
Oh man, I remember like watching that when he showed up, and I was like, "Holy crap!" I was like, "What the fuck?" Can I curse on this?
Go ahead. You're fine.
Okay, I was like, "What the fuck?" I was just like, "Holy shit!" Like this. Wow, they went there. Like that's insane. This is literally the last thing I expected to happen. So it was a nice surprise, and I think that was I hope it. I kind of hope it does, and I hope it doesn't tie into Multiverse of Madness, because I think I want more. The other point is, like, I want more Marvel films to sort of stand on their own. Yeah. Like shifting to like a topic that we're sort of talking about, the latter day DC films are better at standing alone. Like I think Shazam is just a ton of fun. I think Aquaman is kind of crazy, but I really like, it's a good standalone. And I really like even like Birds of Prey was a lot of fun. I'm so excited for the Suicide Squad.
Oh God, yeah.
I think like God, I'm so happy James Gunn is just doing all the things.
Oh, it's funny because you were talking about Guardians of the Galaxy earlier. My wife the other day, she wanted to watch it again, because that was actually how I converted her into an MCU fan. Because when we first started dating, we were talking about like movies and stuff like that, and I mentioned that I like superhero movies. She's like, oh, I don't really like superhero movies, and I'm just like, oh, this is not gonna last. But then one night she was over and I showed her Guardians of the Galaxy and she loved it. And then after that she wanted to watch the second one, and then after that I got her to go watch the whole MCU series, and now she's a fan. So I tricked her into liking them.
The Guardians of the Galaxy films are my girlfriend's favorite as well, and I think she's actually because she didn't see Endgame. She saw Infinity War, but she didn't see Endgame, and she's refusing to watch Endgame until right before we go see the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Oh, okay.
And that was because she wants to see Gamora's story done right, and she does. So that was actually a funny story. So I did not tell her about James Gunn getting fired originally.
Oh, okay.
Let her. I don't want her to find it's just it's a bummer. I'm bummed about it. And then like we're in the car and she's like, when am I getting Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? I turned off the radio and I was like, all right. So here's the thing. What happened? And then it was really, she's like, oh man, that's terrible. And then it was really nice to be like, guess what? He's coming back. That's really, my cat's letting me. My cat's agreeing with me. So yeah, it's one of those things where it was a God. And now like that, the fact that we're getting like, and then I showed she's like, she wasn't interested in Suicide Squad, but then I showed her like the Suicide Squad trailer and she's like, yeah, I'd see that.
Same thing. Like after we watched Guardians of the Galaxy, like I went straight to YouTube and like watch this, and she watched Suicide. I'm like, this is James Gunn's next movie, and so we watched Suicide Squad trailer, and she's like, I want to see that. I'm like, yeah,
yes,
I know you do. Everybody wants to see that. Especially when I told her, I'm like, when I pointed out King Shark, and I'm like, you hear his voice? She's like, yeah. I'm like, you know who that is? She's like, no. I'm like, that's Sylvester Stallone. She's like, what?
That's yeah. I'm so happy here. I'm so happy for James Gunn. That guy deserves it.
Yes,
so,
definitely.
Yeah, but so I think that's the thing. Like, I really hope that the MCU can be weirder and let things stand on their own more.
Mhm.
They were not like required to sort of like watch everything to understand each story, because that's like of the many things post Snyder that I am enjoying is that DC films kind of feel like they're their own. Like, I don't love the Joker film. I don't love it because it is really, really troublesome. Yes, if you get down to the themes of that movie, but it at least feels like it made some creative choices and I and had a distinct style, and I kind of want to see more of that.
Yeah. I mean, we did an episode on Joker. We enjoyed it. Like Derrick and I, we both liked it. Although we weren't like, we were in this weird camp because we weren't. It seems like there are like these two. Okay, sure. They're like these.
That was my. We can pause it and or like.
Yeah, I just did a quick pause.
Just wouldn't stop you.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we were like we were in this. Yeah, we were in this weird middle ground where like, you know, because it seemed like there were these diametric opinions on Joker. Either you thought it was like the greatest thing ever, or you thought it was absolutely terrible. And we were just kind of like, it's okay. Like it
yeah.
It's got some issues. But you know, Joaquin Phoenix is fun in it, and yeah, it was all right. We kind of dug it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like,
so it's like it's one of those things like. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do with the Batman. Because again, that feels like they're making some choices. So it's weird. So it's like there's something to be said about the MCU's ability to sort of make this really cohesive universe and think on their feet, and like, you know, you can watch it all and it all feels of a piece, and there's all these different avenues for like, if you're like, I don't really like this, but I can really I love the Guardians of the Galaxy films, but I really don't like this, but like I love the Avengers films. There's a lot of ways in that you can enjoy it. But there is something to be said about the more latter day DC stuff of just being like, let the director sort of create their own feel for it. So I don't know. I feel like there's a middle ground. I don't know what.
I get what you're saying. I mean, I'm very partial to the MCU style just because like I just coming from the old school comics background. Like I love the interconnectedness and all that kind of stuff. But I do see your point. And the DC stuff, the post Snyder stuff is really enjoyable too. So yeah,
because I think sorry to interrupt you, but like there is like as someone who does it in my own writing, like that interconnectivity is really exciting. But there is a bit of like I guess I'll put it this way, like I'm very tired of like getting to the end of the film and they're like, and here's the next chapter. I kind of I think the thing I liked about Endgame that I found was like, oh, there's no post-credit sequence. This is the end of the story.
Yeah.
Cool. I just didn't feel like I guess I feel like a lot of the MCU films, as much as they're really good, and to your point, great about interconnectivity, there is this sort of sense of here's the next thing, here's the next thing, here's the next thing, and it's like, you know, I miss this like where Spider-Man would show up like in an episode, like an issue in the background, be like, nope, I'm not doing that, and have nothing to do with the story, or I miss that little aspect of it, and I kind of wish it was more of just like, and they did more of it in phase 2 than they did in phase 3, where like you'd have like a cameo of like Sam Wilson and Ant-Man, or like he's like, oh, he's just there, isn't that cool? It doesn't affect this. Like instead, it's one of those things where a friend of mine is a transmedia producer, and it's like, I think it was really good of, well, you need to have someone show up. Why not have it be this character or that character? Why introduce a new character when you can have it just be this person that you already know?
Right.
And I think that's really exciting, like having those little Easter eggs, where I think, especially recently, it has been like, you know, this storyline ties into that storyline, ties into this storyline, and it becomes more of a puzzle. If that makes sense.
No, yeah, I do. And they do. There's some of that has worked really well, like when they had Jimmy Woo and Darcy appear in WandaVision, like, you know, and it had nothing to do with Ant-Man, had nothing to do with the Dark World. It's like, we need these characters to serve this role, so let's have these two characters come in. And so that was a lot of fun, especially just seeing like Darcy, especially seeing like how she was gone from being an intern to now she's got a PhD. So it was, and when you think about the time frame, you're like, that actually makes sense. She could have done that in that time frame.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's talk about the
We
elephant
went
in
off
the room.
topic
Yeah,
by a lot.
Well, we people who've been listening to the show, they know that's one of the trademarks of this show. That was something that always happened with Derrick, as we always got off topic. We did. I was just re-listening to, because I told you I'm making notes for like a memorial episode, and we did an episode on the Hasselhoff, Nick Fury, Agent of Shield, and we spent like probably half the episode.
Damn, man.
We spent like half the episode not talking about Nick Fury, Agent of Shield.
God, I remember when that shit aired, dude. I like my dad loved that. Like, not he didn't love it, but it was just like one of those things. Like it was like appointment TV when it was like a comic book adaptation, and it was almost always terrible back in those days. The kids don't know what they got. They really don't.
Well, actually,
like,
go back and listen to our episode. We actually found some. It's interesting. Like some of the movies we've talked about here, like people are like, wow, you watched that? You must like. No, we actually found good things to say about that, about the original made for TV Doctor Strange, even about Batman and Robin. There's some we didn't have good things to say about. Like we had nothing good to say about The Spirit. We had nothing good to say about Steel, but there's some of the other ones we found some good things to say about them.
Yeah, there's God. I always, I mean, like those Captain Americas. I just don't think kids today understand what it's like to like be a millennial or just slightly older. I forget like whatever it was, Gen X or whatever. Of like every time a movie came out, you're like, it's gonna be terrible. Like it wasn't until X-Men or Blade, and really Blade, we're like, oh, this is a comic book adaptation. This fucking rocks. You know, it's like they don't know how good they've got it.
All right, so I mean that's a good segue into today's movie. Good segue. And this is the Snyder Cut, and where do you want to start with this? Like, what were your?
So it's interesting. So you and I have talked about this off and on online, just about Snyder in general. Like I don't. Boy, how do I start this? I remember enjoying Man of Steel when it first came out, and sort of forgiving some of the things, some of those choices that he made in the film,
right?
Superman killing, things like that, because I thought like, okay, well, let's see what the context is. Like, this is the first film in a series. Like, let's see what he's going to do. And there were certain aspects going in. And when I heard about Batman versus Superman, I'm like, okay, that addresses a lot of issues I would have. Like, Batman doesn't like this. He's gonna like, you know, he doesn't trust him because of all the things that happened at the end of Man of Steel. That's a good meta way of addressing and getting them to fight. And then I saw Batman versus Superman,
and then you got Batman, you know, branding people and all sorts of shit. And like,
at the risk of having all the Snyder Bros come after me, like I believe like Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, both the Ultimate Cut and the theatrical cut are the two worst superhero films I've ever seen.
Yes,
they
absolutely.
are among the. It is a criminal misunderstanding of the characters. It is a criminal misunderstanding of the universe. It is. It's one of those things where, you know, like to talk about Star Wars for a hot second, like people might not like the portrayal of Luke in The Last Jedi. I happen to love it.
Oh yeah, same here.
There are, and then thank God. There's a lot of story reasons why, like, because like it's 30 years, like all the stuff in the previous film, like, you know, there are valid ways that this Luke became this way based on everything we saw preceding it.
And it also kind of mirrors what happened to Obi-Wan and Yoda in very similar ways. Like
exactly. There's a lot like, and you look at his character in the three previous films, the events that are discussed in The Force Awakens. So when he shows up in The Last Jedi, like you might not like it, but it's there. The pieces are there. Whereas with Batman versus Superman, you're jumping in like into the story where we really haven't established who Superman is, and he's not acting like Superman. And you introduce Batman, and he's not acting like Batman, but it's not like he's not acting like Batman in a way that makes any sense to the character. It's like, oh, he's branding people, to your point before. That's not really that's not kind of what Batman ever did, even like in his darkest turns.
Yeah.
You know, Superman is a character who has gotten dark, but he's not someone who ever would say like no one stays good in this world. And there's a lot of plot contrivances that are just sort of forced into the narrative for some reason.
Yeah.
Like the whole Martha thing. I just think it's cynical. It's overly dark. It is overstuffed and underbaked. And I rewatched them both, Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman, the Ultimate Cut, leading up to Justice the Snyder Cut. Overall, Man of Steel, I'm like, again, certain choices I don't love. I'm like, I can live with this film. I can live with it. It's interesting. There's some really, really great choices, some really interesting ideas performed poorly. I think that's a big, and that's a similar thing, I think, with a lot of Snyder stuff. It's like a lot of really interesting ideas not executed well.
I think
Superman. Yeah.
I think this really goes to what you're saying, is that Snyder is not a story guy. Like, he is just not, he's not story minded. He's visual. He's a visual guy, right? To put it in comic book terms, he's like the Image guys, right? Like back when they were working for Marvel, and all of a sudden Marvel's like, hey, let's have these guys write the comic books too, and they were terrible. And like you had Todd McFarlane, who has said, like, he's like, oh, I don't really write it, I just draw pictures until I find something that looks good, and then I try to craft the story around that. And it's like, that's not how storytelling works.
I agree. I think that like he's a really good ideas man. He's a really good visual storyteller, but he doesn't have the storytelling chops to really tell, at least with these characters, to tell something that's coherent. And I think that's like, to the Snyder Cut, it's like, I did not like Justice League, the Joss Whedon version. I think it's a really bad movie. It's I think the biggest sin is that it's boring. Here's the 7 greatest heroes ever. And it's a boring film, and everyone's like, just kind of, it's a Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And with the Snyder Cut overall, I liked it better than the theatrical cut. I liked it significantly more than Batman versus Superman. In a lot of ways, it's a really interesting Elseworld story that if you were to say this is a comic of an Elseworld, like of a darker version of the Justice League, I would almost be on board with this, because there's a lot, like, again, a lot of really interesting ideas executed either well or poorly. It ranged, like some really interesting ideas of this Elseworlds storyline, but I think as your tentpole for a multimedia franchise, a theatrical, like major motion picture, it was the wrong way to go. Like, I cannot, spoilers, for the life of me, understand that the big 5-movie arc was about Superman going bad. Yeah, that's a really good Elseworld story. It's not the series that you do in the, not even just like the main franchise, but it's also not the series that you do in the first like 3 or 4 films. Like, if I understood this correctly, like the idea was that Superman was going to go bad in the 4th movie. Like, that's a thing you say for like the 9th movie or the 12th movie. Like, you earned that. So yeah, I have a lot.
Well, you also have to earn the whole Batman Superman thing to begin with. You have, and watching this movie last night, there are 2 things that jumped out to me watching it last night. One of it is, God, this movie is way too fucking long, and it's just like and it's not like Endgame, right? Endgame is long, but Endgame doesn't bore you during that movie.
No, it's repulsive.
Yeah, like this movie bored me. I fell asleep like 3 times watching this last night. And and like my wife came in a few times and she's like, "Is it still going?" I'm like, "Yeah."
I had to keep myself going with bourbon with cookies, the bourbon infused cookies, and then like just snacks, because it was just like I had to take breaks every so often because it's a lot. It's like, it's weird. It was a better miniseries. It would be a better miniseries than a movie. and it's very indulgent. That's the thing. It's
Yes.
like I think that like Endgame is very tight. Like it is indulgent in fan service. Like there's shit in there that you're like I'm gonna be honest, like there's Writer Adam, and then there's Lizard Brained Adam. Like I could tell that like story-wise that the Captain America like getting the hammer does work. It's been hinted at. It's a story level, it's but really it's all lizard brain nerd like fangasm. Like I just like seeing that shit. Like that's just awesome, right? It's indulgent in that way. It's indulgent in a very fan service way, and sort of like it's a victory lap. Whereas the Snyder Cut is indulgent in like story beats and moments and long slow motion shots that add nothing to the story whatsoever.
I mean, we're seeing Lois with coffee in slow motion. It's just senseless. It's it's choices. Go ahead. No, I'm just like, it's just because you have to make a conscious decision to render something in slow motion like that, right? You have to consciously say like, we're going to slow down the film for these. And it's like, she's getting coffee. We don't need to see that shit in slow motion. Yeah. So it's like a lot of the creative choices that like Snyder made, that he was like, well, look, they're letting me do this. I'm just going to go 110% on it. And since the point earlier, like the thing that I enjoy about it, there's a couple of things I enjoy about it. One is that it's one of the rare times that you actually get to see a filmmaker have like 110% stamp on these characters and this filmmaking. Pardon me. It's one of those things where there's no question it's a Snyder movie. Yeah. And they sort of like archaeological dig verse of the Whedon version and the Snyder version, and seeing what stayed and what didn't, and like how these characters how these directors approach these characters is interesting. It's weird. It's a unique movie because it's like, this is 110% Snyder's vision. He clearly had an idea for these characters. It's not necessarily in and of itself a bad idea. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like that ending sequence of Batman and like the surviving heroes and the Joker and Deathstroke, like facing off against an evil Superman, is in and of itself not a terrible idea. It's kind of a cool Elseworlds comics to that earlier point, but it's like, you have not earned this. Yeah. But something else with that scene is there are a few things that, like, I like what you're saying. I like the idea of the nightmare thing. The whole thing that pissed me off about that was just, I don't know what Jared Leto was doing. Like, it's just every time I see him
Jared Leto knows what he's doing.
Yeah, it's just like every time I see him in this, he's just, I mean, it's like the same thing. I see the same thing with Ezra Miller. It's like, if you get someone who's going to play the Joker, you want someone who can actually laugh. Jared Leto can't laugh. And if you want someone to play the Flash, you get someone who looks like they know how to run. Ezra Miller looks like he's never run before in his life. It's just I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Again, I look, I mean, like, the guy got us Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and like he got us Jason Momoa, like, and even Henry Cavill. Like, I think that's the biggest tragedy with Henry Cavill Superman, is that he's such a charming man, and like, he would be a great Superman if he was allowed to freaking smile.
Well, I think that's what we saw in
smile, and
we got to see some of that in the Whedon cut, actually, and those are the things I like most. Like, bad CGI lip aside, like, he played Superman in that movie like Superman should be played. Yeah. And I would have loved to see more of that.
Yeah. And it's also, like, it's weird. Like, I don't, to that point also, I don't think that Snyder knows what to do with Superman.
No.
Because you have him I'm not exactly clear why he was there at all. Like, because what does he do? He can, like, he's able to punch, like, he's able to fight off Steppenwolf at the end.
Mhm.
That's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's all he really does. So it's like, why did you need to kill him off? Like, there's no reason for him to have been dead.
No.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the point of earlier. Like, I think there's so many things in this series of this trilogy of films now, this non-trilogy trilogy, that it feels like it's skipped a beat. That I feel like I'm missing like 5 films in there, or like even 2 films. Like, I'm missing a standalone Batman film to understand like why this Batman is like this way. I'm missing a Superman film to understand who Superman is, so that way the world would mourn him, because especially the way in, or in like why his death would inspire those to like stand up. And it's like, there's so many things. It's like the road he got to the story. How do I phrase this? Again, to your Google Map thing, it's sort of like he knew where he wanted to go, but instead of like looking at the Google map, he's like, what if I just left, right? And no, but the map says take a right. Like, I'm driving through the building, it's just like, and in slow motion, like, that's sort of what it was like. It's like he knew where he wanted to go. He knew what the story was that he wanted to end up with. And instead of doing the work to get to the point that we needed it to be, he cut corners and, skipped beats. And again, it's one of those weird things where, like, I'm sure someone's going to push back and say, like, well, look, he did this in this film. And I'm like, yes, the beats are there, but they're not.
They don't connect.
There's something missing.
Yeah.
I they don't connect. Exactly. It's like, how does like he go from like, I'm saving everybody to like, you're letting him kill Martha? It's like, well, but can he hear her heartbeat? Okay.
And it's the I don't know. It's like, I think the best description I've ever seen of Zack Snyder is he's a pretentious Michael Bay. And when I heard that, I think it was Chuck Wendig who wrote that. And when I read that, I'm like, that is the perfect description of him, because it's all about the flash. It's all about the visual, but he thinks it's got some deeper meaning, and it doesn't.
I would also, that I think it's weird. I would say that, like, here's what I would say. Take a Venn diagram of Michael Bay and J.J. Abrams in the middle of Zack Snyder.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because it's, like, he is a pretentious Michael Bay, but also he knows what he wants the film to look like, but he doesn't necessarily know what he's saying.
Yeah.
And that's something that like JJ is guilty of, especially in Rise of Skywalker. It's like, it looks great, and there's some really great sequences in that movie, but what is it actually trying to say? What is the story you're telling? You don't even know.
Right.
So, and I think, so it's that's like the Venn. I might tweet that. Like, it's like, it is the Venn diagram of Michael Bay and J.J. Abrams and Zack Snyder.
Something else that really, and going back to the indulgence thing, like, there's some scenes in here that, not only the slow motion stuff, but there's some stuff that clearly we don't need. We don't need the Scandinavian women singing as Arthur goes back into the sea. Right? I'm just like, what the hell is this?
That was, I was like, wow, are we gonna like what is it? That horror film that's set in Sweden. God, what is it called?
Are you talking about the
one with Florence Pugh? Shit, I can't remember it. Midsummer.
Oh, okay. I was thinking about. I don't know much about. What was was that Let the Right One In? Was that also a Swedish one, or?
No, and Midsummer is not Swedish. It's basically a horror film during the Midsummer Festival.
Oh, okay.
I could be Sweden. It's a Scandinavian country. And
okay.
Apologies, I haven't seen it, but it made me think. I saw the trailer and I'm like, yep, that's scary. I'm not gonna do that.
I've been wanting to see that because I heard it's really good. Something else too is like the whole thing about Steppenwolf's armor. Like, I'm looking at this thing where it's like, it's got all these moving parts. It's like big. And I wrote, I was doing a commentary thread on Facebook when I was watching this the first time around when it came out.
Ooh.
And And I said Steppenwolf's design, it's emblematic of Snyder's entire approach to these characters. You know, it's big, it's flashy, it's edgy, but it's got no substance. There's no reason for like the little pieces on the armor to constantly move like that. And I'm like, this is like, it's like a Rob Liefeld drawing come to life. Is how I kind of looked at that.
Yeah. That's a really good. Yeah. Did we ever see his feet? I don't remember.
I think I don't know. It's just like I just got it now. Yeah. It took me a moment. But I got it.
No, you can edit it out. That it's just like, and then like, you know, when I say like, do you ever see his feet, and you start laughing, and like, I got it. So that way, you know, like, you know.
No, it's okay. I'll leave it in.
I don't know, like, and it's weird, like even seeing like Wonder Woman be as violent as she was at the beginning, like again, it's like the sequence is really cool, but then when you stop to think about it, you're like, she
just smashed that guy's head against a wall. And then she vaporized the other guy where his ashes are floating in the air as this little girl's like, can I be like you? I'm like, bitch, you just saw him vaporize a guy. You want to be like that? I want to keep an eye on that girl then.
Yeah. And like there's so much of that. Like even like the sequence with like the Flash saving Iris West, right? Like it's a really cool looking sequence. It's really well done. It's really well put together, but it's also like there's like it's kind of weird.
It's so creepy, like the way he like kind of looks at her like that. Like I get it. It's Iris West. It's Barry Allen, but still, you're making this look really. You're making it weird, Zach.
Yeah, and it's also like, you know, like why aren't you saving the truck driver? You know, it's like it's this, and that's the whole thing about the Snyder Cut. It's like these are cool moments, these are cool scenes, these are cool sequences, these are cool ideas. But when you put them together, they don't really cohere. They don't they become a story. They become some kind of mishmash. And like if you don't think about it, if you're like just like let me turn my brain off and just like go for the ride, it's a good time overall, even though it's like, you know, again, like I don't think it's a great movie. I think it has some it's again better than the original cut, the theatrical cut, but at the same time it's like if you, at the moment you stop to think about the movie, you're like, it doesn't fucking work. It does, like, so
we're also going with the violence too. Is when Superman's fighting Steppenwolf, right, and he slices off one of his headpieces, and I'm just like, that's just, it's cruelty for the sake of cruelty. Like there's no reason he has to do that. It's just there because Snyder thought it'd be cool for Superman to maim an enemy. And there's just God. And it's just like there's so much of this in this movie. And also going with what you're saying about stuff like not connecting, like the whole thing with Silas sacrificing his life. He had no reason to actually do that. He had ample time to get out of there. It's just like you have to kill him so you can give Cyborg some pathos.
Same thing with like there's no reason that like Pa Kent needed to die in Man of Steel.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the exact same situation, and it's there's also the Superman putting on the black suit. Like because in the comic books, Death of Superman, he's wearing that because that's like a regenerative thing. It helps him heal, and he puts it on, and there's no reason for him to wear it. It's just kind of like Clark's like, oh, I think I'd wear black today, and then he's still wearing it at the end of the movie. Like it's just an excuse for Snyder to put Superman in a black costume. There's no other reason for it.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of other examples. Like, you know, like there's no reason that like the Amazon chase needs to be as brutal as it is.
Although I will give cool. It. Yeah, it looks really. That was one of the best scenes in that movie. Like that was done really well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of and again, like you look at the end sequence with the nightmare stuff. It's like this looks really cool, but like, do you know what you're saying with it?
Yeah. Well, it's like his whole thing is when he was bragging about it. The whole fact, like Batman says "fuck" in this movie, and just like I'm watching that, I'm like, there's no reason for him to actually do it. It's just because you thought it's like a 13-year-old idea of what is edgy.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like, you know, when I was 13, I would have thought, oh, Batman says "fuck," that's awesome. But now I'm 37. I don't think that's not cute or anything like that.
That's one of those things where like, yeah, it's like, it's weird. Like so many, that's the thing about, to your point, like with like all the Snyder's films. And I think I think, and that goes to a larger issue, I think, with like media and, superheroes and how superheroes are portrayed. And like, and just, also like, and this goes to Star Wars and Star Trek and a lot of mass media where like a lot of fans don't get past it. Like, well, it's cool. It's like, yeah, it's cool, but what does that mean when you actually break it down? What does it mean?
Right.
That's like what I think, like to our discussion earlier, like with Watchmen, like that, I think that's why the comic and why the TV series works so well. It's like, they said like, well, what does this mean? Like if we did the things that you think are cool and we treated them honestly and treated them with like talking about the repercussions and like what it means for a larger issue, what does that mean? And it's the same, like, look, as cool as it is to see, Luke Skywalker go like bust things up in the Mandalorian. And I'm again, Lizard Brain, love that shit. It was great. But at the same time, it's like, well, like that in isolation, it's fun, but like, what does it mean for a grand scheme? Like, should you have a character like Luke Skywalker, like just straight up murdering people all the time? Good thing these are robots, in the Snyder Cut, it's like, yes, it is cool to see Superman go evil. Yes, it is cool to hear Batman go say fuck, or like the Joker make a reach around joke, or Wonder Woman be badass in the way that she is, or like, or even Cyborg to have the origin that he has. There's a lot of things in it that are in of themselves cool, but when you start actually putting that all together and seeing what that story is saying, it becomes troublesome. I think this film is less troublesome than Batman versus Superman in a lot of ways, but it is, again, it's style over substance, with a belief that there is substance.
Well, going to that, the whole, like, one of the things that pissed me off in this too is seeing Martian Manhunter appear, right? Right. I mean, and Lennox is Martian Manhunter. Yeah, great choice. I would love to see him play that character. But it's just like the way you're portraying him in this movie is he's a coward because he knows what's everything that's going on. Like that's why he goes to Lois and gives her a pep talk as Martha Kent, right? And he knows everything that's happening here. But then he sits out the big battle and he only turns up at the end at Bruce's house. And it's just like, and it's just like, and I love seeing the Martian Manhunter. He's one of my favorite characters, but it's just like, but then you think about it and it's like, wait a minute. You just basically said he's a coward because he's just been sitting, he's been sitting on his ass. And this is a guy who was as strong as Superman and he's not stepping up.
And it's the same thing like with, and just to double back with like Batman versus Superman, like it is interesting to have Superman lose faith in humanity. That's an interesting story to tell, but it's the way that story is told, and like like, okay, but you haven't earned that. You haven't like, you're not actually saying anything. Like, like he's lost faith in humanity, but like, why? Because like some guy was mean to him and took his mom. That's a bit of a reach. Like, okay, he wants you to like, this bad guy took your mother and he wants you to kill this other superhero, and you're like, oh, nothing stays good in this world. I'm like, that feels like a bit of a reach. Like that feels like you have to like, it's a heartbreaking moment to hear Superman say like, no one stays good in this world, but like, you're not saying what you think you're saying, and what you're saying is something worse. And I think, and that's just true of the entire, like, all the films. It's just like, you're not, and I'm just repeating myself.
I mean, I think my whole thing is comparing this to the Whedon cut. I go back and forth over which one I think is better, because on the one hand, I think you make some good points, and in a lot of ways, it is better than the Whedon cut. I will say that it's more consistent than the Whedon cut. Like, that's one of the things that it definitely has going for it. but it's just so long and so overindulgent. And it's just like the way the characters are portrayed is it knocks it down. Like the Whedon cut, for all its problems, it's short. And
Yeah.
at least Superman is acting like Superman. Like those are the two things that I
Yeah.
keep coming back to.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's one of those things where it's like the Whedon cut is a mess, but the characters act like the characters they're supposed to be at least at this point in their lives.
Except for Barry, but that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah, like the story doesn't really make sense. It's kind of all over the map. As a Frankenstein. Whereas the Snyder Cut is a cohesive narrative that is one man's point of view on these characters. It's sort of like and this is going back in my pulp days. Like I am a big believer in there needs to be various versions of characters. And a big early falling out I had with some other pulp writers was like I didn't mind the Seth Rogen Green Hornet because I'm like, well, we never had this kind of Green Hornet before. You know, I think the reason why Batman has existed for so long is because we had the Adam West Batman, and then we had the Michael Keaton Batman. You have two various versions of these characters. So, you know, I don't necessarily like Snyder's version of these characters, but at the same time, I'm glad we have them. So we know we have that like that range. In some ways, it's good for Superman long term because it's one of those things where, all right, we see what doesn't work. Yeah, there's a reason why this doesn't work. There's a reason why Superman and Lois resonates so strongly with cats like us.
Exactly,
because it's like, oh, that's right. This is what we want from Superman's story. Like, and this is important. Think about it this way. Really, for the longest time, there's really been there's the comic Superman for the longest time, which has been fairly consistent. Like there's a Silver Age versions of it, and like this stories get weird, but consistently he's always been like, you know, with some exceptions, like he is a beacon of hope. He is the best version of us, right? And there are stories like Elseworlds where he gets flaws, that he's bad, whatever. But like there's, you know, in the mainstream audience, there is the Kirk Allen, there's George Reeves. There's no big difference between George Reeves and Kirk Allen besides performance. Then there's Christopher Reeve, and he's sort of his own sort of thing that looms so large that it went into Superman Returns. And we on the audience was like, look, we're done with this kind of Superman. Give us one that punches. We want to see that. Like that, we want to see the punching Superman. And we got that in Man of Steel. Yeah, and we got that in the Snyder Cut and Batman versus Superman. But that helps us understand of like what maybe that's not what we want.
It's not just the punching. That's the that's the thing.
That's more
I agree. And I think I think that's one of the reasons why Tyler Hoechlin's Superman is resonating so much. And I think that's also one of the biggest issues I had with Man of Steel is that Warner Brothers is like, this is the only Superman we're gonna have. And it's like, well, when you're telling me this is the only Superman we're going to have, I'm going to hate it. Like, but if you're telling me like, this is a Superman, this is an Elseworlds. Oh, by the way, we got Tyler Hoechlin over here. I'd be much more amenable to Zack Snyder's vision in that case.
And to that point, like we talked about it earlier, like that's like why I'm a little less hard on. I mean, look, I still think Batman versus Superman is hot garbage, and I hated every single second of what rewatching that movie. It was the longest 3 hours of my goddamn life. I think it's just a bad movie, but overall, I can now look at this trilogy and be like, be less critical of it because I'm like, okay, now it's just a version of Superman. It's not the version of Superman.
Well, I mean, it's like if you also look at the Injustice comics, right, based on the video game. Like when I first heard about that first issue where the Joker tricks Superman into killing, like I thought like this is really stupid. And then I actually read it and I'm like, okay, this is actually not bad. I actually kind of enjoy this. This is actually kind of a fun comic book. But it's in Elseworlds. That's what makes it okay.
Yeah. And also and this is something going back to our discussion with MCU. Like I think that what I do will, even though like I'll have issues with their storytelling choices and some stylistic choices, the thing that they've done consistently well is what is the most iconic version of
Mhm.
that character. I think their Steve Rogers is the version, is the distillation of every Steve Rogers
Yes.
to make the most idealized version
Right.
of Captain America. Same with Spider-Man, same with Iron Man. All these characters, you look at them like, that is the perfect version of this character. It takes all these different story elements from all these different places and makes the version that feels like that we've all sort of had in our head,
Right.
like sort of like a collective unconscious version of these characters. With Snyder, what he did instead was very much like, this is my version of these characters, and they're the tent pole. It's saying, like, again, it's like it took an Elseworlds and made it the Earth Prime.
Right.
Whereas if, let's say, it was the reverse, where Tyler Hoechlin's Superman, who is a more iconic Superman, was like, all right, this is our Earth Prime. You can criticize him as much as you want, but then we're having this Elseworlds version over here. We have this Elseworlds version of like, what if he gets dark? What if Superman gets evil? Or like, it's just, I feel like they inverted. They did the inverse of what the MCU did. Instead of like trying to find like the version that appeals to everyone, they were like, what's the one version that appeals to this one guy? And you can only have this one version. And every other. So
That was saying, and I was well, going back to what we were saying about Joker too, I kind of had the same feeling with Joker when, because I'm one of those people who thinks that the Joker should not have an origin story. You should not know who he is. Like that's part of the terror of the Joker, is like he can be anybody and he's just kind of like a force of nature, right? And like the Joker is not a character, right? He's just like this force of nature. He's whatever the opposite of Batman is, right? He's the chaos to Batman's order. That's how he And like whatever version you see of the character is always in relation to what version of Batman you're talking about. So you've got the Chris Nolan Batman, who's very much grounded in the real world. So this Joker didn't have a bath in acid. He doesn't use like exploding teeth or anything like that, right? He uses guns and bombs and real world stuff. And then you go back to like the Michael Keaton version, where it's like, this is a darker Batman, but it's in kind of like this Burton-esque fantasy world, and the Joker reflects that too. And then, the Adam West version, right? You've got, this very campy Batman. So you've got this Joker who's just more of like a nuisance than anything else.
Yeah. And it's also interesting, like in all those versions, like I still feel like Batman was relatively consistent. Like, like they sort of like are molded to the world they're in, but even though Batman kills in the Burton superhero, the Burton versions, it doesn't feel, I can watch this and I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel weird, right? It doesn't feel weird that he's using a gun, but there's something about the way that it's portrayed, that Snyder portrays the brutality of it. So it's like one of those things where, like I was saying, like where Marvel makes his iconic versions, and Batman in the Burton version and the Adam West versions, they're all, and even the Nolan versions, they're all still that iconic version. That are sort of like, that are like sort of fit into this filmmaker's take. Whereas I think Snyder took these characters and reshaped them to fit his world. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it accurately, because I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because it is like, well, I want Batman to kill people, so I'm going to do these things and change his narrative so that way it works. Whereas I think that Nolan's like, well, like Batman doesn't do this, doesn't do this, doesn't do this. How do I make that work in the story that I want to say? The story that I want to tell. Like same thing with the Adam West Batman. Like, well, Batman has all these gadgets. He is very upright, and this is like, how do I make that work in this version of the story? Whereas and again, I might be repeating myself, but with Snyder, it's Batman, or like a good version is like Superman let's do Batman to keep it consistent. Like Batman doesn't kill, he believes in justice, but I want my Batman to be harder and darker. So I need to reshape who he is so I can tell that story.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And it's just like when you look at everything Snyder had planned going forward, like the whole thing with like Batman and Lois having a kid and all that. And
Yeah.
you even get the pregnancy test, and I'm just like, what are you doing? It's just and I don't understand I think Snyder's, like we said, he's really good visual guy, and I think Army of the Dead looks amazing. I'm looking forward to seeing that. More stuff like that from Zack Snyder, right? Do that stuff. You're good at that stuff. Stick to that kind of stuff. But if have him do a question movie or something like that, because that's very much in line with his Randy
and Ryan.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the weirdest things. So this is something that I've talked a lot about with a couple of friends of mine. What's interesting about Snyder is that by all accounts, he is a really decent guy.
Yeah.
He is he takes care of his crew. He takes care of his actors. Mm-hmm. He goes out of his way. That motherfucker called out the geeks and gamers on their goddamn feed. The guy is not a bad person.
No, not at all. Not by any stretch.
By any stretch of the imagination. But the stories he tells are they're well, that's worrisome and that's troublesome. And that's and again, I think maybe this goes it's Ayn Randian or whatever, but it's weird. It's this weird dichotomy of someone who seems to be a genuinely good person who takes care of his family, who cares about the people he works with, who does everything right. And then tells stories that don't seem to connect with the person he is on a day-to-day basis, which is comparatively you have Joss Whedon, who is apparently a monster, telling the stories about female empowerment. And it's here's a guy who is literally using his power as a man in a creative field to abuse women, and he's telling these stories that are female empowering. So it's that weird disconnect.
It is. Yeah.
I'll never understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this coming up on Twitter a lot. I saw someone mention that they preferred the Whedon cut to the Snyder cut, and someone responded what? But Whedon's a monster. I'm like, well, yeah, he's a monster, but he's still. You can be a monster and be a good storyteller.
Yeah.
I mean that. Yeah. They're not. Those are mutually exclusive concepts. Roman Polanski as well. He's a fucking monster, but Rosemary's Baby is an amazing movie.
Yeah. Yeah, my girlfriend and I were talking about that the other day. She didn't. Somehow we came up in conversation. I forget exactly how. Though she's never watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and she wants to watch that, and I was really excited about that.
Oh, that's a good movie. Yeah. You know what? I watched that movie, and first time I watched it, I'm like, it's okay. And it wasn't the second time I watched it, I liked it a lot more. I'm not sure why, but it just appealed to me more the second time around.
What's interesting is I have an interesting relationship with Tarantino. I really like his latter day stuff. I really like. I love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I really love Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained. These alternate history stories. Which is and I think it's partially because they're alternate history stories that I appreciate them more. Excuse me. I remember with Inglourious Basterds, I was watching it. I'm I don't really. This is fine. It's a good movie, but they're gonna lose. What's the point of this? What's the point of telling them, oh, they killed Hitler? Okay, all right, you've told the story. And with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it was the fact that it took a turn at the end. I'm oh, you're doing it again. And I was all right, I'm down with it. And I think, it's weird. His films grow on me, especially his later day films, Django Unchained. I'm this is fine, and oh, this is actually really good. This is actually. It's and I forget what other films he's come out with recently. Hateful Eight. That's an interesting film. Hateful Eight is one of those movies that I really need to rewatch again. I really want to get it on 4K because I know he shot it in 70 millimeter. But it's an Agatha Christie mystery, but in a Western that's really violent.
Yeah, I gotta rewatch that because I watched it and didn't appeal to me too much, but it felt kind of some of the same problems. It felt with the Snyder Cut is it felt a little overlong and a little overindulgent. But maybe I got to watch it again because I kind of felt a little bit like that with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The second time around, I loved it. So I don't know. Maybe I just got to give it another chance.
I think the hardest thing about with Hateful Eight is that it is a bit like the bar scene in Inglourious Basterds, where you just know it's all going to go to shit real soon. I whenever I rewatch Inglourious Basterds, I love that scene, but I skip it every time because I'm I can't deal with this pressure. It's too.
I think one of the problems with Inglourious Basterds didn't have this problem, but I think a lot of his later day movies, I think they need a better editor. Like when he was working, I think it was when he was working, I think it was Roger Avery was his editor before.
No, it was a woman named, I think her name was Sandy.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually gonna look that up because I'm actually kind of curious. No, she passed away at some point, like during, I can't remember which movie, but like they had like a little thing where like everyone would like say like hi Sandy or something. It was Sally. Yeah, it was Sally Mink. She did everything he did in the like hi Sally, and then she passed away in 2010.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's why a lot of his earlier stuff is a little bit tighter.
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think he needs a and now he's got so much clout, like he can.
Yeah, last.
Sorry, once more. You got
sorry, you froze. No, you got cut off.
Okay. We both got cut off on each other side. But anyway, you said what was the last one she did?
Inglourious Bastards.
Okay. So yeah, that's what I think. Like Inglourious Bastards did not have that problem. But after that, like, you know, the ones after that, definitely, I think they had a little bit of that too much indulgence. And I mean, part of the reason too is just like he's such a big name now that nobody's going to rein in Quentin Tarantino. So
yeah. And that's sort of like this, and that's the issue with like Snyder. It's just like he had the ability to do the version he wanted to do with the Snyder Cut, and like God bless him. Like, you know, and it's one of those things where like, and I'm sure you've had this conversation with editors. I know I had it with Tommy when I was working on Crimson Circle. Where I knew what the story was, and I was telling the story, and he's like, "You need to cut this down." I was like, "No." And he was right. And I think that having someone there. And my girlfriend's another great person of being like, like you're better than this line. Like having someone there to sort of like rein you in, I think is always important for a creative endeavor. And I don't think Snyder with the Snyder Cut he didn't have anyone saying like, maybe bring it back a bit.
Well, the only thing he did was it was the Green Lantern thing, right? Because he wanted that end scene. He wanted Green Lantern instead of Martian Manhunter, and it's such a weird thing for Warner Brothers to push back on. Like I don't understand their rationale for that, because they're like, well, we got a Green Lantern. Well, I'm like, this movie doesn't mean anything. So I'm not sure why it matters to you if Green Lantern's going to appear or not. It was such a thing.
Yeah, I was confused about that whole situation.
I mean, but Warner Brothers will do this. They'll have like these strange rules that don't seem to make sense. Like when they were doing Justice League. Right, and they said that the animated series, I mean, and they had they couldn't have any of the Bat family characters, right? They could only have Batman in it, but no Nightwing, no Batgirl, no Robin, none of the Batman villains. You couldn't have any of those in Justice League Unlimited, especially. Yeah, it was like it was a weird rule they had in place, because they're like, well, because Batman's being done in the movies, and it's like, okay, and then they had Smallville, right? Where they had the same thing where. Because Smallville the writers of Smallville, they wanted to do a story where Bruce Wayne comes to Smallville. And Warner Brothers said no, because we're doing Batman in the movies. And it's like, but you're also, as you're doing this Superman TV show, you're also doing a sequel to Superman 2 in the movie. So it's like, you can have those two versions, but you can't have two versions of Batman. They've got these really weird rules about these types of things.
I'm actually then really curious to see what Abrams is going to do at Warner Brothers, because he's sort of like notorious for that, because like he really wanted, like when he took over Star Trek for a while, he really wanted only his version of Kirk to be in, like Kirk and Spock and them to be around. And he's like, you have to cancel like these IDW comics and books with the old Kirk.
Oh wow!
But because Paramount at that time didn't, like CBS owned those versions, like they owned the TV series, so they could do TV series comics. You know, like Paramount had no say over, so because of that split, he couldn't do it. And part of the reason why Star Wars rebooted, this is not 100% Abrams, was because like he's like, I want to start fresh, so kill everything else off, we're going to start fresh, which I think was the right choice for Star Wars for a number of reasons. But you know, so now that, like, thinking like with Warner Brothers, like who is like that. I'm really curious to see how they're going to handle, like, are they going to let him have his Black Superman and have Superman on TV and do like other versions of like the Joker that they're doing, you know?
Yeah,
like,
it's really, I'm really curious
to see if he's going to let that happen.
I'm especially wondering because the whole idea of, and this is something that Derrick talked about a lot, was like he said, you know, when the whole thing about J.J. Abrams coming on and going to be a Black Superman, and we talked about this, I think in maybe the last episode or the one before that, so it was like episode 59 or 60, and Derrick's whole thing was, he's like, you know, you don't need to make Clark Kent black, and like he's like, I don't see, his whole thing was like, I don't see a reason to, instead of making Clark Kent black, you know, you can have a Black Superman. And I think like I'd be much more interested in seeing like the Calvin Ellis Superman, because he becomes president, right? So like seeing like a black Superman who's also a black president would be much more interesting, I think, than just Black Clark Kent, or like Val Zod who's the Black Superman in the Earth 2 books. Like I think those might be a little bit more interesting and show us something a little bit new, because we're already getting, you know, a perfect rendition of Clark Kent on TV anyway.
Yeah. And that's always an interesting conversation, like about either swapping genders or swapping races with characters, because there are really interesting stories that you can tell with the character in a different race or in a different gender. You know, that's an, you know, it's interesting because like dealing with legacy characters, you're always like, how do I make this feel fresh for a modern audience without not like, it's like, I understand it's weird because like I don't have an issue necessarily with like, if you're gonna like cast a new version of Superman and make him black, I don't necessarily have an issue with that.
Right.
But I do see Derrick's point. It's sort of like, well, do you really need to, like, you could, there's already all these other versions. Why not tell that version of it?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's I'm trying to think of another, like a good example of where they've swapped a race. Have they done that in Marvel at all? Or
Nick Fury.
Right. But it's weird. But that's an interesting thing where like, because Nick Fury, he's an adaptation of Ultimates,
right?
Like where that was already there. And it was a sort of like, he was an alternate version of Nick Fury. Yeah. And then they just chose to like, well, he looks like Sam Jackson, and Sam Jackson will say yes to anything. Why not just have Sam Jackson? So yeah, that's a unique version of it, of an example, but it's
when they had Michael B. Jordan play the Human Torch in Josh Trank's movie.
Right. Yeah, and that felt really forced because they were like, how do you like?
Yeah, the whole thing with his relationship to Sue and all that was kind of, I mean, a lot of things in that movie felt forced, but just focusing on that character, I thought he did a really good job. I thought he was pretty much Johnny Storm. Like he was just a black Johnny Storm, but he was very much that character.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like one of those things where like, it's weird. Like I say this as a white passing cis white male. Like, you know, like I'm Hispanic. My father's Hispanic. I'm half Hispanic, so I always feel weird talking about race, especially when I look, act, talk, and sound white. But it is one of those things where, yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Like I think there is a lot of storytelling opportunities with having a Black Clark Kent. But to Derrick's point, like there's also like, why not just use this other version? Or like, you know, like, so yeah, it's a tightrope. And it's a tightrope. Again, I, as a white passing cis male, should not be walking. It is. I think it should be, and I think that's one of those things. I think it should be one of those things that if you are going to have a Black Clark Kent, having Ta-Nehisi Coates write it. That's probably that's the best version of it. Like having a black man write this story.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things. Like I was kind of like. I've got a lot of the same. I think I'm somewhere between like your and Derrick's point of view on this. Like I fall somewhere in the middle between those two. But I think the fact that Ta-Nehisi Coates is writing it is definitely, you know, so like, oh, okay, well it's Coates, so I'm gonna watch it no matter what.
Yeah.
I mean, like I mostly know him from his comic book work, and like, his Black Panther was great. His Captain America is amazing. And so,
I have to read it. I've heard only
it's
good
really
things.
good. It's really good. And so like him writing Superman, yeah, I'll sit through that. Even, whatever reservations I have over whether or not I think it's necessary to have a Black Clark Kent. Like if it's Coach writing it, I'm gonna watch it. That's just the way it is. And also it also kind of goes back to what we're talking about with Isaiah Bradley and the Captain America stuff. Like, you're telling stories about a Black Captain America, but it's not Steve Rogers, because Steve Rogers is a whole different thing. But instead, you've got, Sam Wilson, who's, this guy who's got military history and all that. And there's a whole lot of stuff you can deal with that. I don't know if you ever read the Crew comic book that Christopher Priest did way back in the day. It was like after his Black Panther work.
I didn't know.
Okay, so it was it was like after Black Panther, he did this. It was like only 7 issues. It was called The Crew, and it was like it was like Jim Rhodes. It was Casper Cole, who was at the end of his Black Panther run. Another character, Junta, who was also a minor, who appeared a few times in Black Panther, and then he had the son of Isaiah Bradley, Josiah X, who was kind of like if Malcolm X had become Captain America, and it was just like this really interesting take, because he was not only was he a Black man who had been who inherited the super soldier serum and had fought in, I think they had him fight in the Korean War or something like that. But then also after that, he was involved in the civil rights movement. He became a Muslim. So you've got not only a Black guy as Captain America, but a Black Muslim guy as Captain America. And that had and as much as I love Sam Wilson, as much as I think that he is the right successor because of his long history with Cap, part of me kind of wants to see like Josiah X as Captain America and see like what storytelling opportunities that would open up.
Yeah, that's one of those things, man. I just to go back to that, like, I think that's my biggest frustration with Falcon Winter Soldier, is that like not really diving as deep into the race story is I think that's like it's weird. Like, and this all ties back to the Snyder Cut. Like, I feel like Marvel has a tendency of telling a story like that, sort of like that they don't really dig deep into. The like sort of like tease at it, and like you're like, oh, this is about something, but we're not really going to dive too deep into that, because we
kind of like Tony Stark's alcoholism. Like they touched on that a little bit, but then they're just kind of like, well, we can't make our tentpole superhero an alcoholic, so they just kind of like dance around it. Yeah,
and it's like the same thing with Falcon Winter Soldier. Like, we'll talk about race, but we won't actually explore it beyond a couple of conversations,
right?
And like what it means, like, like little moments here and there. It's they know what they're trying to say, but they just don't really go into in depth as much as they could. Whereas Snyder, in the Snyder Cut, it's like, I know what I want to say scene to scene, but it doesn't all kind of come together to say anything at all. Where so like it's one of those weird things where like, which do I prefer? Like I guess I do prefer the Marvel. Like I'm like, I'd rather be disappointed in them not exploring a topic as deeply as I would like them to, than having a film think it's saying something when it's not saying any, or it's contradicting itself scene to scene.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that does it. I think we've said pretty much all we need to say. So Adam.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, you can find me. I'm mostly on Twitter these days at Adam Lance Garcia. You can also follow me on Instagram at Adam Lance Garcia. You can check out my website, which is adamlancegarcia.com. And if you like anything instead about storytelling and story ideas, you can just type in Adam Lance Garcia on Amazon or your favorite bookseller. Pick up my Green Llama books, Sons of Fire, my comic book, my graphic novel, which is sort of like an evil Superman story, all things considered, but it's an alternate version of Superman. So there you go. And if you check out Wired or Ars Technica or Vanity Fair, you might see a video that I've produced. Okay. I've got a cool video coming out about Quantum Leap very soon, and I really can't believe they'll let me do that. I spent a lot of company money on this thing, and I do not know how they let me do it.
All right. Well, Adam,
Like, I'll rebuild Ziggy. I'll rebuild Ziggy for like thousands of dollars. Why? Because I want to. They said yes.
Well, thanks for coming on. I think Derrick would have definitely been pleased with this conversation. I think he would have been very happy to that you were the one who the first guy to come up and follow him on this show. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this, and we got to do it again sometime.
Definitely, and I thank you. That it means so much, so much that you thought of me in this, and especially in relation to Derrick, because he was such a good man.
Yeah.
And I am honored. I'm honored, dude. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So that does it for this first episode of the new format of Superhero Cinephiles. From now on, we're just going to kind of do the introduction. We're going to be doing it this way. We're going to have a few different guests come on, and then we'll see where things go from there. One thing that will always remain true is that Derrick will remain host emeritus of this show. Like this show was as much. I know he would have always said that all he did was show up and talk, but this show would not even have gotten as far as it has if not for him in the first place. So thanks so much for listening. If you're on YouTube, thanks so much for watching. Head over to Superhero Cinephiles on Facebook is our Facebook group, superherocinephiles.com, or Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Drop me a line. Let me know what you think of this new format, if maybe you'd be interested in coming on, and we'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Join our Facebook group by searching for Superhero Cinephiles, where you can interact with us and other superhero fans. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a regular supporter at Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which can be found at our website, superherocinephiles.com. If you buy or rent any movies through the Amazon links at our site, it helps support the show. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.